Someone looked at my kitchen and decided that my inner life was solved. Now, I've thought about this comment for a long time, like I typically do with strange comments that run across my feed, because that one comment said everything about how we think about problems, what counts as one, who gets to have one, and what it means when the house looks good, but something inside still doesn't feel right. Welcome back to Supporting Physician Spouses. I am your host, Kendra Harvey, a professional certified life coach, and this is the podcast for physician spouses who are done white-knuckling it through their partner's medical training and beyond. Each episode, we go deep into the real stuff like finances, identity, relocations, career, family dynamics, and the marriage underneath it all. I'm so glad you're here. Now, I want to tell you about a different house, one that I watched get built. We had done it. The training was behind us. My husband was a practicing neurosurgeon. We had a beautiful family, and we are building our dream home. Every fixture, every finish, every detail, exactly as I had imagined it over many years. And I drove out to that construction site, sometimes more than once a week. I was carrying so much hope into that building process. And it's the kind of hope that only makes sense when you have been waiting a very long time. I told myself this was it, that this house was the reward for everything that we had sacrificed. The moves, the years of resident wages, the loneliness, the decades of holding everything together while he was becoming who he was becoming. And this house is what I had been promised. And I had believed that promise. What I did not expect was how I would feel when it was finished. Now, to be sure, I loved that house. I had poured myself into it. But when I walked through it, and the life that we had been waiting for had finally materially arrived, I felt exactly the same inside. Everything around me had changed, but I hadn't. And then something else happened that I wasn't prepared for. I began to feel very self-conscious about letting people in to see it. This included my family, my friends, people that I loved, because this house was a visible marker that we had crossed a line. I didn't know anyone in my world at that point who had a home like this. And instead of feeling like I had arrived, it felt like a separation from the people that I came from the version of myself that belonged with them. The house that was supposed to be the reward had made me a stranger. Now, that discomfort was the first clue. My body knew before my mind did that something was up. The house wasn't the answer that I was looking for. That was my first mistake. And that is what this episode is about. Not houses, not kitchens, and certainly not pot fillers. It is about what happens when everything outside you changes and yet everything inside you stays exactly the same. It's about what we carry into this upgraded life that the upgrade was never going to fix. And it's also about why that's not ingratitude. It is not a character flaw. It is one of the most human experiences there is. Now, there's a concept from your psychology class that you might remember. It was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I'm not going to make this a psychology lecture. I would be terrible at it. But I do want to show you what problems actually look like at each level, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And I know you also can't actually see this because it is a podcast, but I trust that you will remember it. At the bottom, you have your physiological needs. That's food, shelter, rest, the basics. And I want to be honest here because I know who is listening to this. A lot of medical student and resident families know what this actually feels like. You remember the ramen budgets, the resident wages that do not match the hours, or moving into an apartment for residency that is actually smaller than the one that you left. And nobody really questions problems at this level. Nobody tells you to be grateful when you're trying to figure out how to cover groceries and gas. Now, just above this is safety, stability, predictability. Knowing that an unexpected car repair is not going to derail the whole month or your life. And a lot of us spent a lot of years right here kind of straddling the line between level 1 and level 2. not quite surviving, not quite stable, one thing away from something being a real problem. I want to rephrase that. One thing away from devastation. Now, nobody dismisses pain here either. It is visible enough that people can see it. They can understand it. Now, to be sure, even those that are in that, first and second level where we're talking about straddling between survival and stability in the physical sense, there are still going to be people who will discount your problems there because they are projecting ahead into the future about what will be, and it gets discounted there. So I don't want to gloss over that. But then as you move up, and this is where it gets complicated. Level 3 is love and belonging, connection, feeling known. And I want to say something about this level that doesn't get said enough. You cannot belong somewhere if you do not first belong to yourself. You cannot connect to another person if you do not know who you are well enough to bring yourself to that connection. That's performing connection and performing belonging. But to truly belong and to truly feel connected, you have to have something in you to offer. I know who I am. I know what I need. I know what I feel. Here I am. You have to know those. And after years of adapting, shrinking, doing without, and perhaps making yourself smaller to make room for medicine, a lot of women get to this level and realize they have lost that signal entirely. They do not know what they want. They do not know what they need. They have been so focused on keeping everything else alive that they quietly stopped tending to themselves. And you cannot feel known by another person when you have stopped knowing yourself. The loneliness here is not just about a husband who is absent or a social life that is thinned out through the moves and the years. It runs deeper than that. It is the loneliness of being a stranger to yourself. Level 4 is esteem, identity, the sense that what you do matters. And this is where I want to slow down, because something important happens here that I lived firsthand. During medical school and residency, so much of my identity became about just making it through, doing without to get there, holding things together until it wasn't necessary, making things possible for everyone around me. That became who I was. That was the program that had been installed in me, running every single day for years. And I harbored a quiet kind of pride in that. I am the one who's making this possible. I am the one who's holding this whole thing together, this fragile system. And if I don't show up, everything's going to fall apart. And it did keep everything running. But then what happens when graduation comes and the title changes and the income gets bigger, the house gets bigger, and externally everything looks different. But internally, the same person is there, still running the same programs, still operating from the same place you built yourself during those hard years. The questions start hitting hard, not because something new is wrong, but because your identity has not caught up to the life that you're standing in. Again, how do I know this? I lived this. I spent decades becoming the woman who does without, who waits, who holds it all together. That was my identity. And when the external circumstances changed, I did not magically change with them. And the hardest part was not the feeling. The hardest part was not knowing what to do with it, because the role I had built myself around was supposed to be finished. And here's the part nobody warns you about. When your identity has been built around keeping everyone alive, around doing without, around making things possible when resources were scarce, something quietly devastating happens when the money arrives and the survival pressure lifts. The function you provided is no longer necessary. You can hire someone to do what you once did. The groceries get delivered, the cleaning gets handled, the logistics that once required every ounce of your resourcefulness and energy can now be solved with money. And that should feel like relief, and everyone around you assumes it does. But underneath that relief, if you are honest, is something much harder to name. Because if the function is no longer necessary, who am I if that is what my identity has been built around? Now, I didn't see it coming. I did not know that my sense of worth had been so quietly and completely tied to that role. I did not realize I would experience it as a loss. I thought the arrival of resources would feel like freedom. What I did not expect was that it would also feel like displacement, like the job I had organized my entire identity around had been made redundant. And no one had thought to tell me that was going to happen. Because from the outside, it looked like things were finally getting easier. Now, these are not small questions. They do not arrive with a warning, and they can completely catch you off guard inside a life that everyone around you assumes is finally, perfectly fine. And this is where the dismissal from the outside gets loudest, because the problem is the hardest to see from where everyone else is standing. And here's the thing that I want you to hear underneath all of this. Every single level of this pyramid represents a legitimate human need, not just the ones at the bottom, not just the ones that are visible and urgent and impossible to argue with. All of them. The need to feel known, the need to believe that what you do matters, the need to become who you actually are meant to be. These are not luxuries, and they are not the complaints of women who have too much and just don't know it. They are needs, real ones, written into what it means to be a human being who is fully alive. To say that only survival level needs are real needs is to say that staying alive is enough, that getting through is the goal, that the top of the pyramid is optional, that it's a nice to have for women who have the luxury of wanting more. It is not optional. It is the whole point of life. And before I go further, I want to say something important about this hierarchy of needs, because the way it usually gets taught, it sounds almost like a ladder, like you climb from the bottom and you solve for each level and you move up one at a time, that it's nice and neat, it's linear. That is not how it actually works. You can be financially stable and completely lost at the same time. You can have safety and security and still not belong to yourself, or to feel like you belong in your community. You can be striving towards who you actually are while still running survival mode programs you built a decade ago. These levels are not automatically behind you once you pass through them. They are alive in you all at once in different areas of your life. And that matters because it means the gap you feel is not a sign that you are behind. It is a sign that different parts of you are in different places. That is not failure. That is just honest. So when I talk about level 5, becoming who you actually are or who you're meant to be, I am not describing a destination most of you haven't reached yet. I'm describing something you are already reaching for. The fact that you feel the gap between how your life looks and how it feels is evidence that you are already there in some part of yourself. You would not feel the gap if you weren't. The reaching is real, and it deserves a real response. So a pot filler is a solved problem, or so it appears. I have a pot filler in my kitchen, the one that got the comment, and I want to tell you something about it that nobody can see from the outside. The water that comes out of it is orange. Not a little off. Orange. We have never once filled a pot from it. We can't, because somewhere behind that beautiful backsplash, there is a galvanized fitting that is corroding. Quietly, invisibly, doing damage in the dark. Now to fix it, we would have to tear out the tile, open up the wall, replace what is broken on the inside, and then put it all back together again. From where you're standing, it looks perfect. A beautiful kitchen detail that someone noticed and felt the need to comment on. A signal, apparently, that everything is fine here, there is nothing to see. Now, from where I'm standing, I know exactly what that pot filler cannot do. And this is what happens when someone looks at your life and decides you have no problems. They are looking at the backsplash. They are seeing the finish and the fixture. They cannot see what's behind the wall. They do not know what is corroding quietly behind it, and they have no idea that the thing that they are admiring is the thing you cannot actually use. Nobody installs a pot filler for the part of her that got quietly set aside during the hard years and never got reclaimed. Nobody upgrades the kitchen for a sense of self. Nobody hands you back your wants and your needs and your desires that you learned to stop listening to because there was no space for them, no time. And honestly, no one around you who even knew to ask. The external life got an upgrade. You didn't. And I'm going to be very careful here because, again, I'm not talking about gratitude. I loved that Arizona house. Gratitude was not the problem. The problem was that I had been waiting for something outside of me to do something that only I could do. The house was never going to give me back to myself. Nothing outside of me ever was, and nothing outside of you can. So the gap, the one between how your life looks and how it actually feels to live in it, is not ingratitude. It is not a character flaw. It is not something that you can fix with a gratitude list or a better attitude or more patience. It is a real experience and it deserves a real response. If you are experiencing something as a problem, you have every right to address it. Again, I spent years waiting for training to end, waiting for the salary to be commensurate with the work that is being done, waiting for the house to be finished. And every time the external thing arrived, I felt the same because the thing I actually needed was not outside of me. It was not a house or a kitchen or a pot filler. What changed things for me was someone who could see me clearly from the outside and reflect back what I had stopped being able to see in myself. That is what I am honored to do for the women that I work with, and it is available to you also now, not when training ends and not when the schedule settles and not when the kids are older. This process is available now. Thank you so much for being here today. Let me know what you think of this episode. You can send me a DM on social media at Kendra_itgetsbetternow. All right, everybody, I look forward to being with you again next week. We've got another special episode planned, also based off of some crazy things happening on social media. So I hope that you'll stay tuned for that one. Until then, have a great week. I'm cheering for you. I have something for you. It is called the Life After Survival Mode Guide. It is a private reflection guide for the physician spouse who thought it would feel better by now. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's not a course. It's not a program. It's just a quiet place to start. You can find the download link in the show notes. And if you find yourself reading that guide and wondering whether there is more, whether this is the season to actually do something about the gap between how your life looks and how it feels, I would love to explore what working together could look like. You can learn more at www.itgetsbetternow.com.